Chapter 6. But why not? I think you mean the Einstein-Rosenberg bridge, Sammy corrected Justin. It's a theory that states, whatever, Justin rebutted. All I know is that he turned down every recess activity the school has to offer. And when I asked him what he wanted to do, he asked if I knew about that Einstein-Rosebush thing. Einstein-Rosenberg bridge, Sammy repeated. Whatever, Justin shouted, throwing his hands up in the air. I guess that just leaves me, Eric said, not sounding too excited. Hey, you never know. Maybe you'll be the one who knows how to get his attention. I sure hope so. Normally, we had music hall on Thursdays, but our teacher had to reschedule us due to the district-wide earthquake drill. The emergency drills would usually only last 5 to 15 minutes, depending on what kind of drill it was. Fire drills were short. Once we heard the fire drill bell, we would quietly and calmly line up outside our classroom while one of the emergency drill monitors grabbed the doorstep and made sure our classroom door was propped open. The other monitor would grab the emergency bin, which was basically a trash can on wheels filled with emergency supplies, and roll it to the back of the line. Our class would then walk out to our designated spot on the field. Once every class turned in their attendance report, the all clear bell would sound and we would head back to class. Earthquake drills took a little more time. When we heard the earthquake drill bell, we would quietly and calmly secure ourselves under our desk or chairs and wait for the fire drill to bell sound. We usually had to wait a minute or two before that happened. Besides that, everything was the same as the fire drill. Thursday's drill was completely different. It was an earthquake drill, but this time we had scenarios that staff and students had to play out. Some staff and students were injured or stuck in a classroom or under rubble. One kid was too scared to leave the classroom. One second grader, at least I think she was in second grade, even got to take a ride in the school's wheelchair because her leg was broken. Anyways, because Thursday's drill lasted like 45 minutes, we had to combine with Mr. Anderson's class for music hall. It's not that bad, actually. We've done it before. No biggie. Okay, class, Mrs. Whiston said before heading to music hall. Remember, I'm going to be looking for good choices and zero volume during music hall. Every time Mrs. Jordan has to say someone's name or redirect our class, that will be a point taken away from our classroom total. What if it's the same person over and over? Jessica asked. Every time, Mrs. Wisdom repeated. That's not fair, Shanika protested. The whole class shouldn't be punished for one person's bad choices. If it's the same person over and over, then they'll get to sit next to me for the remainder of the class, Mrs. Wiston explained. And remember, if you have to sit next to me, that means you'll have to fill out a corrected behavior sheet and get it signed by a parent or guardian. Corrected behavior sheets were half sheets of red paper stapled together. Your name and date went at the top of each page. On the first page, you had to fill in the following blanks. Inappropriate behavior I displayed. What led up to my behavior. 3 choices that would have been better than to the one I made. At the bottom, your parent or guardian had to print their name, sign it, and date it. On the second page, you had to write an apology to whomever it was that your inappropriate behavior was directed at. And that wasn't it. You lost your recess the following day. And if you didn't bring back your corrected behavior sheets the next day, you lost the next day's recess too. And the process continued until you brought it back. Who remembers what we did last week? Mrs. Jordan asked, scanning the room for raised hands. Marley. We learned about how without math, we couldn't have music, Marley recollected. Marley was the smartest girl in Mr. Anderson's class. Correct, Mrs. Jordan praised. And why is that? Jefferson. Because we get our names for musical notes from the fractional name that they represent in mathematics, Jefferson explained. I think. Correct. But how can we say that more plainly? Mrs. Jordan asked. Marcus. It's like a pie, he began. A whole note is like a whole pie. That's right, Mrs. Jordan commended, while drawing a circle on the board. And if I cut that pie in half, I now have 2 half pieces, Marcus continued, as Mrs. Jordan drew a line inside the circle, making 2 equal halves. That's where we get the name half note. Who can continue from there? Mrs. Jordan asked. Josephine. If we cut those pieces in half, we now have 4 pieces. If we eat 1 piece of the pie, we've eaten 1/4, or 1/4, which is where we get the name quarter note, she explained. Very well explained, Mrs. Jordan said, drawing what Josephine had said. Let's do one more. Yes, TJ. If we cut each quarter piece in half, we now have 8 pieces, I said, waiting for Mrs. Jordan to draw it on the board. You may continue, Mrs. Jordan permitted. Thank you. If I eat one piece of the apple pie, I've eaten 1/8 of the pie. 1/8, eighth note, I concluded. Great job, guys, Mrs. Jordan said excitedly. Now, since we don't have enough instruments for everyone to use today, I decided that we're going to do something different. This caused most people in Mr. Anderson's and Mrs. Wisson's class to, "Aw." I know, I'm such a terrible person, Mrs. Jordan said in a pouting voice, as if talking to a baby or a little person. But I guess that means that I brought these for nothing. What Mrs. Jordan held up for everyone to see immediately changed our jeers to cheers. Okay, let's see. I like the way that Jeremiah is controlling his body, Mrs. Jordan pointed out. Everyone quickly sat up straight and folded their hands and listened quietly. Great job, guys. So I know we normally use these to play a game with just one class, Mrs. Jordan began, but today I'm going to change things up to make it a bit more fun. You're probably wondering what in the world Mrs. Jordan held up in her hand that made everyone get so excited. And you yourself probably wouldn't normally get excited over such things, but you don't know Mrs. Jordan. She knows how to make things that are normally boring into things you can't believe you're enjoying. Mrs. Jordan held up flashcards in her hand. Usually, she would break up our class into 4 equal groups, at least as equally as she could, and we would play the flashcard game. But since we had 2 classes, she did change things up a bit. She combined the flashcard game with Steal the Bacon. Each class lined up against opposite sides of the room with a helper from each class. She lined one set of flashcards for each class in the center of the room. Then she called out a music symbol, letter name, dynamic, or tempo. Lastly, she called out a number, and the person with that number had to run to their set of flashcards, find it, and hold it up as fast as they could. Whoever held up the correct answer first scored a point for their class. Before we started, Mrs. Jordan made sure that Victor had music at his old school. After rudely telling her that he already knew all of this, the game began. 1 point, TJ, 1 point, Justin repeated over and over on our way out of the school. We had lost by 1 point. Actually, we had to have a tiebreaker. Mrs. Jordan let each class choose a representative for the last point. We chose Jefferson, of course, and Mr. Anderson's class chose Marley. Unfortunately, Marley was just a little bit quicker at finding the correct flashcard for her team. Get over it, Sammy ordered. I know what I'm going to do, Erick said out of nowhere. Going to do? I asked. To get on Victor's good side, he said excitedly. What are you going to do? Marcus asked. I noticed at the end of music hall, when Mrs. Jordan was playing the high five song, Victor was doing a little dance, he explained. A little dance? Paul asked. Yeah, Erick answered. It wasn't much, but I noticed it. And he has good rhythm. So, what are you going to do? I asked, still not exactly catching on to what Erick was thinking. I'm going to ask him to be my partner for the annual dance-off, he said, jumping up and down enthusiastically, then busting a couple of moves. I don't see how a little dance and good rhythm is going to turn into a pledge to win the annual dance-off, Sammy said unenthusiastically. Why do you have to be such a downer? Erick said. I'm just saying, we've already tried the things we thought he liked, Sammy said defensively. What makes you think trying something we're not even sure he likes is going to work? Because it has to, Erick said confidently.